Salam, salam, ishtanin singaye. This is Weiss.
And I'm Almas.
And welcome to another episode of the Samovar Network. This is actually interesting. I've never done this kind of intro with the camera on. It's very intimidating. I'm like staring at myself and seeing all the quirks, which is never a good thing. But so this episode it's an episode to provide space for queer and trans Afghan voices within the diaspora, both here and abroad. We had some great guests who provided their insight and reflections on such an important topic. This was also an episode that we recorded in June to coincide with Pride Month. And Almas, why don't you tell us sort of where the conversation went?
Yeah, so Qais, Diba, and Wazina Zondon joined us as co-hosts on this episode, and we talked about a lot of interesting themes, including the complexity of closets, and that coming out isn't always just a one-time experience, the role of language, and naming ourselves and each other. It's especially interesting because one of our speakers, Diba Farah, who joined us from Germany, was speaking Farsi in this episode. So it was a really interesting dynamic to take part in and witness that theme specifically. We also talked a lot about decolonizing queer and what that entails, and allyship within collectivist communities specifically.
As with always, these each of us we're speaking on behalf of ourselves, our own experiences, and again, we can't possibly cover everything in these conversations. So for those who are listening, if you feel like the conversation maybe didn't hit something that you were interested in, just know that we want this to be a necessary conversation that not only did we have today, but also that we continue to have. And it's important to keep that conversation going. So as with always, if you like what you hear and you want to continue to explore what the Samovar Network has done, please follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and on our website, samovarnetwork.com. And additionally, if you like what you hear and you really want to make sure that you continue to support us, one of the best ways to do that is to follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, to rate, subscribe, and comment, preferably something nice like, hey, this was a great talk. Weiss really provided a lot of insight. Almas is an incredibly intelligent person, and I enjoyed listening to what she had to say. I'm not telling you exactly what to write, but if you DM me, I can tell you exactly what to write. So anyway, I hope you enjoy. We had a very amazing conversation with some incredible people. So yeah, enjoy.
Yep. So welcome to another episode of the Samovar Network. We're here today with some very special people. Before we begin, I want to explain the format of this episode. Usually those impacted most directly by institutional oppression are asked to carry the burden of labor when it comes to sharing their experiences or talking about these really abstract things that are not just abstract but close to their lived experiences. Today we're doing things a little differently in that we're here to have a collaborative conversation with Qais, Wazina, and Diba Farah, where they're not only co-hosts but co-collaborators in this conversation that addresses homophobia, transphobia, other forms of oppression in our communities. And yeah, we're here to talk about some really complex and interesting things. I'm really, really excited to be talking with you all today. I think it'd be helpful if we take a moment to introduce ourselves, mention our pronouns, where we're talking from. I can start. My name is Almas. My pronouns are she and her, and I am speaking from London, Ontario, Canada, not England. Qais, do you want to go next?
My name is Ahmad Qais Munhazim. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm speaking from Philadelphia, United States.
Welcome.
Thank you. Diba Farah, معرفی کن.
Yeah, I am Diba. Mara begin she. I am from in Germany, in Hamburg. Now I am in Berlin. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Wazina Zondon. My pronouns are they and she, and I am in the office of my little sister's job in Old Bridge, New Jersey, but I live in New York City.
Nice.
Salam everyone, my name is Weiss. I'm also a Samoa Network coordinator along with Almas. Pronouns are he, him, and calling from Los Angeles.
Nice. Thanks for introducing yourselves and sharing the space with us here. I know we wanted to talk about the complexities of closets, and I know that speaks a lot to the research that you've done, Qais, if you want to speak to that.
Yes, that's a great place to start because I've done my work, ethnographic work, field work with African Americans, particularly in Washington, D.C., Virginia, also California and Maryland. So coming out oftentimes came up during that time, but also I wanted to first give a context. What does coming out mean? What do we mean by coming out? Coming out is particularly in relation to queer and trans identities. I use queer as an umbrella term for lesbian, gay, bisexual, asexual, and intersex communities. So coming out particularly means accepting oneself and their truth about their gender and sexuality, but then also revealing it to others, revealing it to close friends, revealing it to family, and in a way confessing it. And so it becomes a more a process of confession, and which continues throughout people's lives, because coming out is not just one moment. It happens over time, and it happens multiple times and in multiple places, because people tend to come in and come out of what they call the queer and trans closets. So that's the basic construction of coming out, and it's oftentimes practices and traditions that are mostly Western. So they're oftentimes in Europe, it's North America, so places that are influenced by liberal systems and structures. And yes, Wazina.
And I was going to say that for coming out is oftentimes in those contexts of more Western European, and I'm going to also often name it as countries and places where culturally it's like more whiteness, and whiteness, the experience of like white queer people or LGBTQ community members oftentimes get projected onto or mapped onto our experiences as queer people, necessitating that we have the same versions of outness and the same coming out experiences, and without that, ours is somehow, or anybody is less legitimate or not done appropriately or correctly, as if there's a singular trajectory, and there isn't a singular trajectory of what out experiences. Even as a queer Afghan out person, right, all of us will have very, very different a different trajectory, and there's no singular correct way to do it. There's no completion point, unless you personally identify it as your completion point.
Yeah, I completely agree. As Wazina said, that people don't have this one singular way of coming out, and that's what I have noticed, especially in the Muslim communities and also within the Afghan community. There's so much pressure on the queer and trans people, and we have talked this before with conversations with Zina and also Almas, that how coming out itself becomes this pressure on people, which we are already experiencing so many other forces in life, which is exile, the forces of being displaced from our home, and also the surveillance of state, policing, the diaspora itself has so much sadness and violence that coming out for the queer and trans Muslims in general, but also Afghans in particular, becomes a burden. But then also it becomes a loss because they do gain some liberal freedom, but also they lose. They lose sometimes friendships, family members, support systems. So it is very, very complicated. And for that matter, there is a lot of Afghans that I've met and I've talked to them about these issues. They really complicate coming out in their own authentic ways. Living in the closet itself and being queer and trans should be celebrated as much as coming out, because there's not one way of living a queer and trans life. There's multiple ways that we can exist, and closet itself is forces that allows people some sort of freedom, but within this clandestine space that is secretive, that we can hold our secret. We don't have to share it all the time everywhere. What do you think, Wazina, with especially question of holding secret?
Sorry, did I lose you all?
Yeah, yes. So my question was back, I was trying to like gauge your ideas with being in the closet. It's a way of also like holding secret. And I just see that as like a power at times, because you have this like magical power that nobody knows who you are, and you don't have to like reveal, but you can reveal yourself partly at times when you're comfortable, and then disclose yourself again or unreveal yourself.
Yeah, for me it allows for whether it's like depending on who you let in, right? So there's the magic, then as a result, if I share with somebody authentically who I am, that speaks to the depth of affinity that I have, love for them, like for them, whatever the case may be. So I've learned more and more that it's a secret that's not a burden, it's one that's chosen. Mm-hmm. Because there's a distinction between the lies we tell and the secrets we hold.
Yes.
And now more and more as somebody, I am out professionally in very many ways, but I also am very compartmentalized in my when I'm out and who I tell that to. But I no longer feel like I'm lying. I just choose not to share that part of myself in this moment. And I, as a sexuality educator, and the work that I do with teachers and other folks, and the sex ed work I do encourages and reminds folks that it's holistic. Our experiences of sexual identity, gender, body image, it's all many layers that intersect with one another. Mm-hmm. And then I think about everyone has a sexual identity, everyone has a sexual orientation, a gender identity. And at what points do our cis siblings, our heterosexual siblings, figuratively or otherwise, get to come out?
Yes.
And I say this, and I'm offering this to Weiss as well, to consider this kind of question, and you tune in a moment, or definitely if you were interested in speaking to that. But I also think about the sexual self-expression that I was taught as an Afghan girl child, an Afghan woman in America. My sisters who are heterosexual do not come out about their sexual identity, their straightness in any way, shape, or form. I remember this story. My cousin got married to a man, got pregnant, was very excited, and she called her father. And my uncle was like, "Oh, this is clearly an American thing. Why are you calling me to tell me you're pregnant?" And she's like, "Aren't you excited?" He's like, "No, you're not supposed to call your father and tell her. Like, of course, please do tell me." He was really excited, but he's like, culturally, that's not a thing. Even though you're married. So I think about the sexual identity development expression that. Overall, many of us have much more overlap with than maybe with my American, non-Afghan, non-Muslim friends in their sexual development. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So a question was presented to me, so I'll go ahead and I'll speak on it. I think there is a point to that when there's certainly also intersections with all of this, where even within cis hetero spaces that I was essentially effectively raised in, I mean, there was still the double standard anyway, where as a straight woman, because I grew up with a sister, so I have I've witnessed certain experiences that I didn't necessarily share. Although at the same time, to your point, sexuality, even for me as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, it was still pretty closeted in a way itself. I remember when I was in middle school, like seeing like white friends, predominantly white friends, like talking about having girlfriends, talking about dating and things like that. And in my head, I was just like, you brought your date to your house? Like, that was a thing you can do? And they were like, yeah, my girlfriend and I watched a movie with my parents, which was a concept that was so foreign to me, where it's just like, even within cis households, like for me or for anyone else, it's like you were expected to eventually get married, but everything prior to that point was essentially a don't ask, don't tell policy, where you don't share any details, you don't say exactly how it was going to get done, you just get it done. So, and then once that happens, then the family gets involved and things like that. So your point kind of reminds me a lot of, I don't know how many people have watched this movie, but Love, Simon, where it's like, why should the burden fall on the LGBTQ community to be quote unquote coming out of the closet? Like, why can't that be a burden for straight people as well? Because discovering your own sexuality is an experience for everybody. Everyone at one point discovers their sexuality, but as a straight person, I'm not obligated to make that as some sort of bold proclamation. So yeah, just it's a concept that because like I don't remember the exact time, I don't remember the exact date that I discovered that I was straight. And I think that's telling, because I feel like at least I fall victim to it, of expecting people within the LGBTQ community to identify the exact time that it happened. But whereas I never had to think about it.
I think that's really telling for how the heteronormative expectation is pushed on you from a very early age, as soon as you're born into your family, and just before you're born, yeah. Like gender reveal parties to they're so tacky, so tacky. I would rather like a zodiac reveal party. It'd be much more interesting. Like, my child is a Gemini. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm kidding.
Like, you pop a balloon and crabs fall out.
Basically, yeah. It's interesting how it becomes like a joke too. Have you ever seen like those baby clothes that are like, this is my girlfriend, or like playa or something like that? And it's just like, you're already ascribing sexuality to a baby, which is in itself problematic. Like, you're sexualizing a child, but also you're forcing that child to fit this heteronormative culture.
دیبا جان، دیبا گفته ما سر چی گپ میزدیم؟ آشکار کردن جنسیتانی. ما اکثر به حساب وقتی که کسایی که گی می باشن یا ای که همجنسگرا می باشن باید برای فقای خود میگن مثلا همجنسگرا هستم، اما کسایی که نیستن، استریت هستن، اونا ضرورت ندارن و هیچ وقت تو سرشان فشار نامده که باید بگوین برای کس آشکار کنن که چی هستن. خودت به حساب چی نظر داری از این، خصوصا در قسمت خودت، یعنی زندگی خودت، یا قسمت اگر میخوای که عموما درباره کسایی که ترنس هستن گپ بزنید و جنسه، آشکار کردن به حساب جنسیت و جندر و اینا چقدر فشار بالای مردم مندازه و چی دردهایی را باید آدم بکشه در اون جریان؟
Yeah, به یک مسئله خیلی مهم اشاره کردین. در مملکت ما که افغانستان نام داشته باشه، ما هنوز یک پرابلم بسیار کلانی که داریم. هنوز امو هتروسکسوال ها، مرد یا زن که هستن، خصوصا زنا، با وقتی که میخوان نرسیدن. باز اگر من حیث ما یک نفر که حال نرتماده است، نامای زیادی در روی ما است، مرا که خویش و خود جامعه نمیبینم و این آشکارسازی مساوی باعث که تو همه چیز باید فراموش کنی. یه همه چیز شامل چیز، شامل یک فامیل کلان است و ترک میشی و امکان داره که کشته شوی اگر در افغانستان باشی. اگر باز در دیگه مملکت ها باشی، بازم تنهایی باید یک زندگی را خودت پیش ببری و کسی مسئله را در افغانستان 99% مسئله را ایش درک کرده نمیتونن، چون هنوز اون مملکت خیلی پرابلم های دیگه داره تا که بخواه به جنسیت مرا بفهمه که چی است، مرا بخواه کشف کنه.
خیلی ترجمه کنم قیش اول اجازه است. So Diba is explaining that in Afghanistan there is this, even the heterosexual people, the men and women don't know much about sexuality. And so let alone the queer coming out, the trans coming out. And then when it comes to the queer and trans people, particularly trans people of her own experiences, it's really hard for anyone to like reveal that, but also there are so many other problems and complexities in life living in Afghanistan that sometimes people don't think about coming out, which I was mentioning that earlier to my point that we have so many other issues even in the diaspora. So similarly in Afghanistan, it's similar to that. And also that where Diba has lived in Iran, she mentioned, and also in Afghanistan, being trans is itself exposes them to a lot of violence, particularly murder. And so coming out then becomes very, very difficult in those instances. خب بگین ادامه بدین. دیبا؟
و بله من میگم. در حالی فعلا مسئله که بین ماست، مشکلی که هست، ما در یک مملکت زندگی میکنیم که او مملکتی است که دین اسلام داشت و دین اسلام مطلقاً با این مسئله مخالف است و ایستاد شده مقابلش. اما با همون وجود مردم، خصوصا مردای بسیاری، اینا بی سکسوال هستن و خودشان خبر ندارن. مثلا یک مرد
چون پوینت بسیار خوب بود. Diba again added that Afghanistan is an Islamic country, and so obviously there's a lot of instances that are against homosexuality and trans identity that comes from the religion, or people use that. And Diba was just adding that there are many people in Afghanistan, many men who are bisexual, but they can't talk about it. خب
و بی سکسوال هستن اما خودشان این را قبول نمی کنن. باز میگن که این کار حرام است و این کار کسی که کار میکنه این جزا داره. یک نفر که اکتیو است، مثلا در سکس که میگه، یعنی او کدام پرابلم نداره چون اکتیو است. اما یک نفر من حیثی که من که میتون مثلا شاید استایل دختر میزن، این عیب است و این حرام است و در پیش مجازات های بسیاری است. و این تفاوت ها تا وقتی باشه کس جرات نمیکنه که بگم من اینی هستم و همون که ما میگیم مملکت ها میگیم من اینی هستم مرام با ترس.
That's another great point. Diba mentioned that many men in Afghanistan, the men who are bisexual, they don't even consider themselves bisexual, particularly if they play the role of a top. I mean, if they are in the gay relationships, particularly men to men, there are different roles, sexual roles. So those who are top and those who are bottom, and usually oftentimes who are top, they don't consider themselves gay. And it's usually the ones who are bottom. And so within that, it's really difficult because it exposes them to violence for a lot of these people to come out in Afghanistan. So that's why then the queer and trans Afghans have to, I mean, the lucky ones get to flee the country, and the very few lucky ones then make it to another place and then outside to live their truth, but then they have lost so many other things in that process. تشکر دیبا جان. باز پس سوال دیگه باز میگیم بر ترجمه میکنم.
تشکر است.
I know
also, yes.
You go.
Wazina Jan, no, please.
No, I was curious. I was starting to think about how do we set up, how do we support, encourage, at least here in the States or outside of Afghanistan, because that's, I think, who's listening mainly right now, but holding space or encouraging the allyship or the solidarity, the camaraderie, the moving from being an ally to an accomplice, thinking about even deeper in people's commitment to liberation or to co-liberation. So what would it take to encourage more allies coming out of their closets or stepping up for, I'm just like, this is just, I know this is like the theme of our question, of our conversation today also, because I found various forms of that, right? I found Afghans that I grew up with sharing public information that I've done, like a link to something or a video. And then what I realized is that they're putting it out on their Facebooks, their social media. And I am the litmus test for whether or not they can then respond. What they will often do is play the devil's advocate, or be like, well, I just want to hold the space for everyone to have their opinions heard at my expense, yes. Right? And I just happened to know that because I saw them post, the video that Wazina did. And then it's the bombardment of terrible comments. I mean, to the point where I've gotten Afghans tell me that, fine, I've heard this from other people, don't call yourself Muslim, which I proudly do, call myself Muslim. But I've even been told by Afghans, do not, like, you're not Afghan. And I was like, you can't dismiss my blood and beat, get out of here, right? But it goes as far as that. However, those allies, so-called allies who put this out there, then don't defend or step up because they don't feel safe, right? Or there's something compromising for them. Will somebody think they're queer also, or too sympathetic? So I offer this as a whatever for us to discuss.
Yeah, I think it's too much of privilege that they hold, that it's just literally like white people, that it's so hard to shake them out of their privilege that they need to come as allies and what they can do. It's similarly to cis straight Afghans, that it's so hard for them to understand that they have this privilege that the queer and trans people don't have, that when they speak up while they are in the community, most of the times people wouldn't suspect that they're queer. And even that the suspect itself at times doesn't hurt them. But if a queer and trans person stands up for themselves or reveals themselves, it always ends up with violence, with rejection. And to your point, I've seen many people. I mean, I went to the African American conference, which many people of this, some of our who are the listeners have been in that space. I see them, and in there are these amazing performative allies, but then I don't see them actually doing any allyship, except for maybe one or two of them that I can name or count on. The rest, they're just silent. They're just this like, oh, like you're all welcome in my private space, and like we can be friends. But you know what? There hasn't been even once to see them on their social media to write anything about queer and trans. And especially particularly at times like right now that they're talking about racism within the Muslim communities and the Afghan communities, the allyship that they are showing, this needs to extend to also Black trans and Black queer people. Because when we talk about support to the Black communities and our allyship and our solidarity, that also extends to the trans and queer people. So it needs to happen, and it needs to happen now without these sort of performative allyships that they have. They need to unpeel their layers and layers of privilege, and within that they can pave the way for others to live in a peaceful society.
I think it's important to note too, and Qais, that was really well said, that it's queer and trans Black folks are not only the most disregarded victims of police brutality, but they're usually at the forefronts of activism around those topics. And very similarly, in my experiences, I've seen that it's a lot of LGBT and queer Afghans who are also at the forefronts of fighting things like Islamophobia and racism and refugee rights within the countries that they live in. But they don't receive the same type of support, and private doesn't count, in my opinion, that they do for their communities.
I thought this was a good or more natural pivot to this the other part we were thinking of want to discuss today, which is languaging and our language that we use, and why what Almas really got me thinking was also if it is the most marginalized of us, queer, trans, hyphenated Afghans, oftentimes many of us being first or second generation refugees or immigrant parents, we have a closer proximity to understanding. I'm not going to, not all, because there are very problematic queer and trans Afghans, 100%. But many of us have a closer proximity, maybe affinity and understanding of how our struggles are co-aligned, how they overlap, and why it's so necessary for us to be on the forefronts. But I think about this, the being on the margins. And so for me, I use the word queer, and I appreciate that Qais, you had said that, we're using queer as an umbrella term for our conversation, but I know I specifically use, and I name myself as a queer Afghan, and because, for many reasons. One is because of the sexual and gender breadth it gives me. I don't identify as pansexual or bisexual, but I do understand there's more than just two genders for me, and that I have an attraction to different expressions of gender. I also really like going away from like love is love, and like just gay and lesbian is also still very like whitewashed language for me. And because I don't always think my sexual orientation, who I hook up with, have sex with, sometimes has nothing to do with love. It's just lust. It's just something physical. So I'll just definitely own that part. And I think queerness allows for that. Unapologetic, it is not about love, it's just a physical thing. But I also truly love the word queer as a political term, because in this country, as a Muslim, as a daughter of refugees, there are institutional and political and social, there's laws made to vilify me as a Muslim. And so as a result, and there's imperialism, there's like the war machine that will continue always to kill Muslims in other countries. So as long as those things exist, we are consistently and constantly queered. We are always made to be other, marginalized. And so not just, and like queer, not just as a sexual orientation term, but like many of us are queered in this country. But we don't step up because we are clinging to power, or a form of power that probably they'll never give it to us genuinely. But I think about like just queer serving multiple, multiple purposes for self-identification. But many of us have had bad experiences with that. So I don't know if Diba would like to speak to that, Almas or Qais, like how language has been hard to find, to name ourselves with that.
دیبا جان، وزینه بسیار یک موضوع خوب را آوردن به حساب زبان، که در زبان مثلا فارسی، خودت زبان فارسی صحبت میکنی، زبان دری، بعضی از این الفاظی که ما میگیم، واژه هایی که به حساب کویر میگیم یا ای که گی اینا اصلا وجود نداره. نه اگر وجود داره به شکل‌های دیگه است. چی فکر میکنی کدام واژه را به خودت استفاده میکنی و چی مشکلاتی هست در خود زبان فارسی، یا خصوصا در قسمت همی واژه هایی که برای مردم کویر و یا ترنس وجود نداره؟
داخل افغانستان خب کدام واژه‌ای خاص وجود نداره. مگی بیشتر بچه‌ها را به من حیث میشناسن که کسی که با بچه میخوای همخوابی کنه و میگه او ایزک است و یا میگن کونی، اما کدام شپیتسیل یک نام محترمانه نداره. و من مثلا در ایران که بودم، در ایران چون کمی اونجا بهتر است، باز نام ماندن مثلا هم جنسگرای مرد، هم جنسگرای زن، ترانس ام تو اف تو یا لسبیش میشناسن. اما به حد آگاهی افغانای ما در این باره بسیار کم است که او شو یک بچه افغان دوستم است، 2 سال همراه من دوستم است، چی میگه دیبا تو لسبیش میکنی؟ ما گفتم که شاید میدانه لسبیش که منظور که من مثلا که خود من دختر میگیرم همراه دخترم سکس میکنم یا همراه ترنس. گفتم منظور چیست؟ گفت منظوری که مثلا تو همراه بچه ها لسبیش میکنی. من گفتم تو نمیفهمی. باز برای من توضیح دادم که چی گپ است. متاسفانه کدام کلمه مناسب وجود نداره، بیشتر نامحترمانه است هر چی است.
Diba just expanded our knowledge on the terminologies that exist or the lack of it in Farsi and Dari, because Diba has lived experience in Afghanistan and also in Iran, and also a very, very well-spoken Farsi speaker. So this is a good place to also learn from Diba's knowledge and language, saying that in Afghanistan, Diba mentioned that there are no respectful terms for the queer and trans. The terms that are used are Izak and Kuni, which are derogatory terms that are used to demean and humiliate the same-sex relationships or trans relationships and the identities and experiences of people. But also mentioned that there's also not much knowledge about sexuality. Therefore, there hasn't been a space or a place for it to develop terminologies around these identities. Therefore, even people who live, Diba was giving an example of someone in Germany, her own friend for the past 2 years, who also living in Germany doesn't understand what trans means, what lesbian means, and what these relationships embody. So there is lack of that even when Afghans move and live in the diaspora, so they carry that with them. شکر دیبا جان.
و پرسان کردن که من خود من چی میتونم نام بمانم. من با توجه به اینکه حالی 5 سال میشه مهاجرت کردم در مملکت اروپایی آمدم و واژه ها رو بیشتر آشنایی دارم، اما من خودم یک پسر میدانم، بچه میدانم که متولد شدم و همیشه شاید یک احساس داشتم که همیشه دختر باشم، اما خود دختر من نیستم. من میتونم خودم یک بچه بنام که احساس دارم که از لحاظ جنسیتی با بچه ها باشم و مو احساس های دخترانه مثل کالا پوشیدن اینا رو دارم و خودم کشف میکنم که یک نام بمانم، ولی شاید پس آنها نام ماندم.
And also in relation to her own identity, Diba is complicating that understanding of it, that now living in Germany for the past 5 years and coming to understand other terminologies that exist here, and also with the knowledge Diba has of these terminologies in Afghanistan. For Diba, Diba identifies as a boy, as a guy or as a man, but also who tends to like other men, who also tends to like women's clothes or the clothes that are often identifier of women. So it's much complicated. And then at the end, Diba mentioned that as I'm learning all this, as I'm exploring myself, one day I'll come with a term that I identify with, which doesn't have to fit with the community or with these already labels that exist in the community, which is a revolution in itself and something that I think a lot of queer and trans people hopefully will do in the future.
I think that that fluidity of that journey is a really beautiful sentiment. I think it's interesting how much language can be freeing, but also a construct. Constricting. I think maybe Wazina, you can speak to this. I'm thinking of even myself and probably many of you growing up, how little knowledge we had of different narratives, of different experiences, of different ways of living. And if there were any gaps in terms of education within the home or within the school systems. I don't know, I guess I'm curious of what you think the role of, as an educator, what your perspective is on the complexity and importance of language.
Yeah, I mean, language is, if you don't have the right words to name yourself, then you almost don't exist. And then there's the language that does exist for and about people who look like you, your parents, and it's used in derogatory ways or used in ways that don't really fit. And then you're like, then do I fit in this thing? And the right or the wrong language can just tear your entire psyche and being apart, right? And schools are where, we encourage the exploration of such things. Schools both for learning and socializing and just all different purposes of what schools are meant to be. Schools are also meant to be care institutions. They're not meant to be places where you just bank knowledge into a poor child's head and make them pass a test. But schools, when they're not equipped to be trained, whether it's staff, faculty members, even curriculum, a school can be as great as it is, but if it's not reflecting the population or the narratives, the multiple narratives in that student population, it does a lot of harm. A big part of my work is working with schools around making sure that they're not just like LGBT inclusive, but as a sex educator, training other sex educators and faculty so they stop reinforcing the biases, conscious or unconscious, when it comes to identity. So like best example is my work's around homophobia and Islamophobia a lot of the time, and working with schools, realizing that they are perpetuating these Islamophobic narratives around how Muslim kids can't be gay or stuff around their gender. And there's a lot of work there that I've been just challenging folks, and the Safe Schools movement is doing a lot to ensure that there's LGBT visibility, but all of the posters and those sort of things only give like 1 or 2 Black people, like Bayard Rustin and maybe maybe Laverne Cox in the last couple of years.
I was about to
and then there's no Middle Eastern, no South Asian, nothing, right? Around anybody who could look like us. So there's that piece. And then most schools say that they don't talk about faith, but yeah, we do, because guess who has Christmas break? You all do. But we don't have, so, and then it continues to reinforce our invisibility, both when it comes to culturally, religiously, but also in our sexual identities. That if you go to your teachers, and a lot of times, my big thing is working with also counselors and social workers, do not tell a kid to come out. Do not facilitate a conversation with a child to come out to their parents. And it's, I appreciate everyone's all we're all giggling because I do it, because everyone's like, what? How would I do that? So it's, so I'm just posing all this bunch of the responses, but anybody else can also respond.
No, I really like the point that you brought up, that your own work, working at the intersection of homophobia and Islamophobia, and how that also from a very young age in schools, this is like both, there's a lack of that education around both of them, that how they both intersect. And then also these, from a very young age, not seeing any role model and who's also very much like you and who also embodies the same identities as you and who also has complex ways of living, impacts people's relationship with themselves when they're adults. And that takes me back to my own field work when I was doing with the Afghan American here in the US. It came up so many times that Afghans, Muslims in general, but also Afghans, live in these very peculiar intimate spaces of homophobia and Islamophobia. So they are in this middle part that they have to continuously struggle to go this way or that way at times, because the queer and trans community in overall is quite white, and they're also quite Islamophobic. And then there's a Muslim community that is majority, a lot of them are homophobic and transphobic. So what happens with these queer and trans Muslims, and also particularly queer and trans Afghans, especially who have had these experiences of the war of the empire, the war in Afghanistan that is continuing for the 19th year. And then they also need to protect their families. So in this conversation, I theorize something that I call Matryoshka doll subjectivity. So these Matryoshkas are, they call it also in Afghanistan Russian dolls in a lot of places. These are dolls very popular across different countries in Central Asia. And these are, as you can see, wooden painted dolls, colorful, that are different dolls nested in the inside each other. And they also embody, as you can see, the inside of them reveals different colors, different genders. They also embody the concept of femininities and masculinities and the complexities of them, that how people don't know who you are, you reveal. So that's exactly what happens to queer and trans Afghans in the diaspora. They, for forces of homophobia within their families and Islamophobia in public, they tend to take on these forms or lives of Matryoshka dolls. They shield themselves to protect themselves from Islamophobia and homophobia and reveal themselves as they feel safe. So safety is so important, but also central for queer and trans Afghans, which for all queer and trans people, but particularly for queer and trans of color and Afghans. And so they reveal themselves based on how they feel comfortable, and then again, close themselves. So this is for their own survival, for the family's protection, for those expectations that they have from their families. And also, some of them mentioned that our parents have lost so much back home. They have lost so much here. To bring us and raise us and give us a life that they couldn't have. So at the least I can do is to respect them and make them feel that I am living their expectations. And of course they had these feelings of guilt that I am lying, but I think with all these conversations, we can build that solidarity around those complexities, that how we have such complex lives coming out shouldn't be a force on people. Even if we are celebrating coming out, we should also celebrate Matryoshka doll subjects who live complex lives in two different layers because they don't have a choice at times.
But by the way, for those who are just listening via the podcast, Qais had a Russian nesting doll and was opening it and closing it as he was speaking. So it was very good visually. So if you're only listening via audio, please check the video because it was a very powerful mix of both visual and audio. One question that I have actually listening, especially when I was listening to Diba and then as well with Qais, is when Diba was explaining aspects of her identity, I noticed, especially once the word trans comes in, and I think I may have picked up also the word queer, to use English words. And I do have a question when it comes to the concept of decolonizing queer. How you all feel like with this idea that like, because English is a colonizing language and it is a language that has packed into it like centuries of imperialism and conquering and Islamophobia and transphobia and all, all sorts of phobias to it. How, especially when you're speaking Farsi, like to then have to transition to potentially to English when discussing concepts and identities like trans and queer. I guess I was just opening the floor for anybody here, just how you all feel doing that.
I think there's a retraining that we have to do, and I think this speaks to the question Almas asked about the schools, but because that's those schools are the vehicle, the vessel through which all this languaging gets peddled onto us or internalized as priority. And I had to retrain myself to stop problematizing our culture. And I'll say the reason I'm going to like just kind of a convoluted anecdote, but because of the role of teachers, I was very close to all my teachers all my life, and every single teacher took me under their wing because I think they thought that I came from a family that wasn't going to let me go to school. But my parents were like, they might have homophobic stuff in them, but they're less sexist. Let's say that. But then I ended up problematizing my parents, being like, they'll never get it because they're never gonna be open to me being gay, all these things. And so I created this gap between us, and it was very isolating for both of us, and I felt very alone without them. I believe in chosen family, and as queer people, kind of creating your own family that will love you in your authentic self as queer or trans and across in all the ways you identify. But for some of us, that means leaving our family of origin. And it was very isolating to think about leaving my family of origin because I do love them. They know me very intimately. But then I started to remember that in our culture, there are so many ways that gender is expressed in a way that affirms me now. I think about surma on both men and women. I think about and when my American friends would say that, they're like, oh my God, why is that guy wearing eyeliner? Like, but you're like, eyeliner is such a thing that we do. All genders do that, right? The intimacy of same gender hand holding, men holding hands with men, and that may or may not mean anything about their sexual expression, but it's that there's, and I also really do enjoy using the word they or the pronoun they for myself because it's easier for me to say, shema or whatever than, like to use a gendered one for it. So, I just those are the ways that I've learned to retrain and kind of reprioritize our richer history that is, yes, has homophobia and transphobia in it, and also other elements that challenge what they say about who we are. And okay, you're on your back. Okay, good.
I will just ask Diba. دیبا جان ما درباره مثلا چی گپ می‌زنیم که در افغانستان مثلا خود بسیاری از کلتور و فرهنگ و کلچر و زبان ما یا کارهایی که میکنیم اکثرش بسیاریش مثل کویر است، یعنی سرمه زدن نی، مردم سرمه میکنه، زنها هم سرمه میکنه، خینه یا هنا on the hands. دیگه چی چیزایی را تو خودت متوجه شدی که در جرمنی مردها به حساب نمیکنن، مردایی که استریت هست نه، اما در افغانستان میکنن چون مردم ما یک کلچر داریم که بسیار به حساب صمیمانه است در این قسمت ها، اما باز هم یعنی
مثلا بچه ها مثلا زیاد امروی هم در پروفایلاشون عکس میگیرن، دستن دیگر هم میمانن من حیث برادر اندیوال بیشون تو شیفت رو دیگه جانم برد بگه قاششان کل میکنن چیگه جانم بگه برای
حالا لباسای حساب گرد دامن گرد که است نی؟
یا از اونا میپوشن
دیگه وطنی که است
وطنی میپوشن، یا باز مثلا همگیشان لب سرک که میرن دست را میگردن. من تعجب است، یک که آمدم گفتم کی ایجا که میبینم میگم گی است، اما در افغانستان یا در ایران دو مرد دست به دست که بگیره خب کدام پرابلم نیست، بگن ما دوست هستن امروی من دوال هستن، اما به چشم اروپایی و امریکایی ها میگن اینا گی هستن که دست هم دیگه گرفتن.
That's what Diba was explaining, just adding to what Wazina Jan was mentioning about the very queer part of the Afghan traditions and also ways of life and holding hands between same-sex people and the intimacy between them that exists, and also doing henna on the hands, khina, wearing sarma in their eyes. That Diba was saying that if I see that in Germany, when I see two people holding hand, immediately I think that they are gay or queer, but then in Afghanistan, it doesn't cross your mind. But what happened, I remember living in Afghanistan, that narrative is changing with the invasion of the US. So when the empire comes, they bring, of course, their views of homophobia with them. And within that, they started talking about Afghan men holding hands and then questioning their sexuality. There's a lot of work written about Afghan sexuality, particularly Pashtun sexuality, that they're all gay, they are holding hands. And those are ways that the empire or the invading forces are trying to queerize and sexualize the identity of and practice of Afghans and label it, which we don't have those labels. And those labels allowed us to express those intimacies with people without having these tensions on our head, without having to expose ourselves or reveal ourselves. And that's changing in Afghanistan. And I remember 2012, there was these cars in Afghanistan that were having like rainbow stickers, and they became a news in the US. So Washington Post and others started writing about it. I don't know if you all remember it, that, oh, Afghanistan's coming out, all the cars are carrying rainbow flags and stickers. And those became a trend in Afghanistan, not because they were equating rainbow with queer and trans. It was just that rainbow is beautiful. That's how I was raised. And so when they heard that, the drivers in Afghanistan, because there was a news articles in the West, and then they also were translated back in the Afghan newspapers, they started thinking that, oh, they're calling us queer, so they had to remove that. And then they said, oh, the drivers were so homophobic, they removed that. And so that narrative of like forces that like pushes people, and that goes back to that how we can decolonize queer, how we can decolonize our own understandings. It's these ways that our history, if we think about Hafiz, Rumi, and Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, all of these many queer people, poets and artists and scholars have come and left and from our lives, and we grew up with their work. But the narrative started changing, and the narrative is changing. So how to go back to that is a lot of work, but it's a work that we all can do. And we are seeing instances and places that people are trying to trouble that and go to back to their queer history.
Yeah, very well said. This reminds me so much of aspects in Indigenous culture that are like pre-colonial history. For example, like two-spirited. So much of the homophobia that exists now is just a product of colonialism. I've been thinking a lot throughout this conversation about the aspect of being from a collectivist community. Wazina, you mentioned like chosen family, but also the love that you have for your family. I think growing up in a collectivist community, we're all collectivists at heart. It's very hard to remove ourselves from that. I'm wondering what you all think of the individualist approach to a lot of the issues we have in our communities, and if there are any collectivist approaches to addressing homophobia and transphobia and making our communities more stronger and healthy. If anyone had any thoughts on that, Weiss, if you had any thoughts on that as well.
Weiss, all the eyes are on the ally, so how are we gonna address that?
Well, I think, well, now that I had everyone staring at me, I think, and this actually stems back to what Qais was saying earlier when it comes to sharing not necessarily the burden, but to do the work outside of just patting Qais on the back during AAC and then going back to our normal, our everyday lives as if it's done. Like I did my allyship because I went to his session at AAC once a year. Going back to it, and it involves a lot of self-critical analysis, at least. So for me, I'll just use myself as an example. When the Samovar Network had I think at the start of Pride Month, we put out, I think, a a message that said, I think it was queer Muslims are still Muslim. I believe it was something along those lines. And then there was a couple other ones as well. And I was, because I'm a member of the Samoa Network, I'm resharing everything. And I paused on that one. And I was, again, and not because I didn't believe it. I actually do sincerely believe it. But I was thinking of what posting this will affect me. Like it was a very self-centered way of thinking of, well, I mean, most people know that I'm married, so like they're not going to assume anything about myself. So I'm not, it might not be. And then I had to catch myself from thinking that. Long story short, I did post it, but the fact that I had to stop and think about that one specifically kind of was a wake-up call for myself of just how much am I willing to do the work. And I think when it comes to that collectivist thought that Almas was saying, where when it comes to cisgender heterosexual Afghans, to know that it's more, doing the work is beyond just saying things in private, but actually what does this mean to me on a public sense? Because to be honest, like even within our conversation here, I have to acknowledge that my personal safety compared to the rest of you is probably not in threat, right? Like I'm probably, I mean, knock on wood, but I'm the most likely to be okay. So what does that mean? That means that I should be putting myself out there more, using that privilege and using that understanding of my personal safety is not as much of a threat. Now, within living in the U.S., it kind of is anyway, because I'm a person of color that is, there's always going to be an inherent threat at my life, but not to the same degree and not within those intersections. So understanding that part of our collective thought identities and our collective, Afghan diaspora, to know that, hey, if I'm in a position of privilege, one, acknowledging where my weakest points are and allowing myself to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge that that's a weak point and still try to push on through beyond it. And as much as when we're talking about collectivist thoughts, but it still comes with individual accountability, right? Where I'm accountable. I have to be accountable to myself as much as I personally think is as important as holding the members of my community accountable, because I find it so much easier to call out other people than it is to call out myself. And I feel like I want to spend as much time calling myself out, and not just calling myself out with no action at the end of it, but to actually allow that to have some sort of public demonstration that shows it. I realize I was rambling a bit, so I'll stop.
Oh, I think that was really well said. In addition to calling ourselves out, being from collectivist communities, there's also the aspect of calling our families out when having those conversations. Wazina really reminded me of like having some of these conversations with my parents and how much they actually surprised me. I think sometimes we don't give our elders enough credit. Of course, there's a lot of homophobia and violent rhetoric within our communities, but I do think we have the responsibility to have those difficult conversations, very similar to having Black Lives Matter conversations with our families too. They're difficult, but they're important. So
can I just ask that same question from Diba? Diba,
جانا
ما درباره مثلا مسائل گپ میگفتن که چی رقم به حساب کسایی که حمایت کنندگان کسای اجتماع کویر همجنسگراها چی حمایت رو تو به حساب از افغانا گرفتی و یا از فامیل خودت چی حمایت های شده بر تو یا نشده؟ میشه درباره از یک چند کلمه بر ما بگویی؟
از افغانا حمایت در اروپا ما قناع شدم نه به این جنوان، چون همگی میترسن که ارتباط بگیرن، میگن اگر ما همراه تو کانتکت بگیریم مردم سر ما گپ میزنن، شاید مثلا تلفنی مسیج یا مثلا این تو کار. از طرف فامیل خودم که دیگه میگن که امرایش کانتکت بگیریم بهتر است که آبروی ما نره، بیابگری نکنه. منظور از فامیل شاید مثلا کاکا یا ماما اینا، اما برای من شخصا همگیشان 98% مرا مثلا بیخی تو پس کردن، گفتن بروی شاید 1-2% مادرم یا خواهرای ما، یک چند دختر کاکا و بچه کاکا که اونا هم در ایجا هستن. دیگه حمایه نمیشن. افغانا ترس دارن، ما افغانا میترسیم از گو مردم که حالا اگر ایره ما حمایه کنیم سرمان چیال میایه و نمیکنن و من برشان حق میتونم از یک لحاظ نمیتونم. خصوصا در این مردمایی که در اروپا هستن کلان شدن، اما هنوز همون مفکوره‌ای که قدیم داشتن، همون مفکورهای بسته را دارن و قبول نمیکنن ابدا. من یک دوست افغان داشتم، اینجا تولد شده بود، ترانس بود، مادرش قبول کرد و پدرش میگفت اگر کدام وقت که خودت بخوای چنج کنی یا چی من تو را میکشم. و او بچه گم شد، من دیگه ندیدم اون کجا رفت. فکر میکنم رفت تا کانادا، بیخی ترس داشته، ایجا تولد شده بود.
باش خیلی من ترجمه کنم. So Deepa added to that support from allies, or in what ways allies have come to support queer and trans people. Diba mentioned that there's a sense of fear. They're scared. What would people say? Mardum chimega. And so even in Europe, those who claim that they support, they might do it through text. They would text her, but not so openly to come and be in contact with Diba personally or with other queer and trans people, because there's a fear of that. Why are they reaching out? Why are they surrounding themselves with queer and trans people? And personally for Diba, I mentioned that majority of the family has cut her out, have rejected her. And that's a very common shared experience for a lot of queer and trans Muslims, and also for a lot of out queer and trans Afghans. And in the case of Diba, mentioned that the only 3 people who are talking to her are her mom and maybe sisters and some cousins, who also, the cousins live in Germany. So also like, then a wrap up that she did was that a lot of people who are in Europe, Afghans, they have brought all those very old traditions and ideas with them, and so they have lived with that, and they continue to live with that, to the point that one trans person that Diba knew disappeared because when he came out to the family, the mom accepted her. But then the dad said that if you fully transition, I'm going to kill you. So the person had to just leave and go somewhere else. Probably Diba was saying that left some Germany and went to a completely different place, and nobody knows where. So the disappearances of queer and trans people that are physical, comes from these processes of violence on them through family members, through community, that they feel rejected, so they have to find survival somewhere else.
That rejection and that shunning and that silent treatment, that's definitely a form of violence. Of course.
چیز میگفتی دیبا جان؟
میگم که و مثلا یک مسئله بسیار جالب بر من است که افغانای خود من که اینجا هستن، اگر کدام کسش بخواه کانتاکت بگیره، بیشتر از روی کنجکاوی میخوان ببینن که مثلا یک انسان مثل من چی است، چرا قسمی است، و من بسیار این مسئله رو با اونا هم تو تشریح میکنم که گپ است و بسیار کدام فامیلای خوب هستن که مثلا مرا قبول کردن، میگن که اوکی خدا شما رو خلق کرده. و این بیشتر که درک نمیکنن خواهی از ناآگاهی، چون این معلومات ندارن و ما مثلا ما خودتان نه شخصا میتونیم کال اینترنت همگی داره معلومات بدیم، کم جور میشه.
That's good. That's a great point. That Diba mentioned that there are some Afghan families who are actually supporting her and who also believe that this is how God has created you. So if God has created you in this way, in this sense, why wouldn't I accept you and respect you? And this, you are a creation of Allah. And for that reason, they are supporting Diba, but Diba said that there are also other Afghans who just want to meet with her to see what a trans person look like. So it's a sense of curiosity. They want to learn that. But then there's also, because maybe there's lack of knowledge on the queer, particularly also trans Afghans in the community. So the internet is expanding that knowledge and exposing people to multiple knowledges on these issues.
You know, engaging in this space, especially like
مثلا وقتی که با من
آفرین قطعش کن بگو چی گفتی گفتم خوبه بگو گپ بزن
مثلا یک چیز بسیار مهمی بازم که مهم است وقتی که با من مثلا دوست میشن میگن که خود تو ایزک هستی امینایی که رقم توستن شما چول دارین یا مثلا واژن زنانه کس دارین باز من برشون تشریح میکنم مثلا من بچه هستم باز میگه خود تو مثلا قسمی چی خوش داری مثلا باز فقط همه گیره بیشتر بچه ها رو میبینن مثلا لزبیان ها رو ایج نمیشناسن گی ایج نمیشناسن فقط همی ترانس هم میشناسن که یک بچه هست که شاید خوش داره دخترش داره یکی نمیره میشناسن و شک دارن میگن شاید سینه داری شاید مثلا یک سامان دیگه داری و همش میگن ها میکنن هم چون داری هم
So Diba was mentioning that like a lot of those who come and even ask her wants to get to know her. They, in some ways, Diba was implying that it's just like a violation of privacy and too like asking questions that are too personal, whether are you a boy or a girl, what sort of like genitals do you have, that becomes so personal. And then they also have that curiosity only towards people who are, they call them Isaac, and then so they ask them those questions. They have no sort of like curiosity or even understanding and knowledge that there are also lesbian Afghans. They're also gay Afghans. They're also bisexual Afghans. So there's only that they only want to know the trans because it's so different for them. And it's also that they think that those are the only ones who exist because they're visible and they sometimes are, Diba was saying that like, there are some communities of them in Germany. Sorry, Weiss, I was just joking.
No, Qais, I've had enough of a relationship with you to know that I can, and I also understand it's important for me to step back. I guess the reason why I wanted to just jump in very quickly is that in talking about personal accountability versus having engagement within your family spaces, things like that, I didn't intend to make it seem like I'm belittling that second thing. I think it's highly important to have these kind of conversations. Just from my own personal experience, I find it that the biggest point to drive within family spaces that might not be super aware is this concept that I feel like, at least within spaces that I'm familiar with, there's this deep-seated thought that at the end of the day, it's still a choice. It's still something that a person wants to do. Like it's not something that, and Diba's point reminded me of that, where she indicated that the people who have been accepting, they are accepting because they understand that that's how the person was, that's how God made them. That's how they were born. And so, which is why I find it interesting talking about the intersectionality of like BLM and Afghan minorities, where I'm finding that more and more people are becoming more and more accepting of these differences because it's very clear to them that this is just how God made them. You know, they're that way. Like, so of course we have to accept them. But I'm finding the resistance towards queer, trans, LGBTQ, all of that is, there's still that block that prevents them from accepting that that's something that God made someone. So when it comes to my engagement within family space, within friend space, is pushing that that hindrance that they have. So I wanted to just jump in just to say that I think it is very important to have those kinds of conversations.
I had a question actually, mostly directed to Wazina, Qais, and Diba John. I know we, when we talk about LGBT experiences, it's always this really depressing conversation, because the reality is, you know, that people with these lived experiences will face violence and pushback. But I'm wondering if you guys have had any affirming experiences, and what are your experiences with self-love and empowering yourselves and empowering each other? If anyone wants to speak to that.
Do you want to go first, Qais?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we do tend to talk about the major struggles, but also there are celebrations of our identities and the self-love that oftentimes Afghans in general are not taught from a young age to love themselves, because we're told to love God and Allah and then the Prophet, and then love our parents and love our siblings and all that. By the time we get to a point of self-love, we are already adult and we don't have that relationship, which is a problem from a very young age. But for me, my relationship with God has really, during a time that I grew up in Afghanistan during the war, and then the fact that I survived, I've survived multiple displacements and also multiple wars, and that has strengthened my relationship with God. And through that, I've started to also loving myself, because I knew there is an entity who loves me, and that was God, and that was Allah. And with that, my relationship, from a very young age, I was not narcissistic, but I loved myself. I knew how to protect myself. Despite the forces around me, I knew where to find peace, and that was usually poetry. I wrote poems, and I found peace and love in those moments that everybody would sleep late at night, and I would just sit and write under the moonlight, because we didn't have electricity. So those memories of even that allows me today to continue loving myself, because I have come from a place that it's dark, it's war, and where I am today is a blessing, but it's also magic, and those are queer magics that happens when we start loving ourselves. And but also, I do have many privileges that many people wouldn't have.
For me, focusing on the resilience, the joy of being queer and Afghan and Muslim is the center of my work. It's why I became a sex educator. I wanted to focus. I knew when I was younger I was going to go back to Afghanistan. I was going to like do maternal infant health, and I remember being towards like before, and I was like, I want to talk about pleasure. I want to talk about things that make me feel good. I don't want it just to be a half sad thing only, and and that's also reality. Maternal infant health is a true and real issue, public health issue in Afghanistan and abroad. So for me, it's like, I want to center joy and delight. Coming out Muslim, the storytelling work is about everyone thinks it's going to be one thing, and it's just only, some of it is complex, but it's meant to center the good stories, like the light stories, because we are filled with some darkness and war and struggle and traumas, and so it's nice to talk about the pleasurable stuff. I always liked focusing on the celebration, the wins. The wins won't always look like the way we thought they were going to look, but the fact that I can hang out with my dad, now after having been kicked out of the house way back when, that's a win. Like I can replicate my mom's kurma's flavor, that's a win. Like, so there's ways that I like to center that for myself, because it's really hard to be us, any of us in this world. And so I really enjoy focusing on the celebrations. And that is an act of self-love. I struggle with it, like self-care as much, but I appreciate the fact that we are a collectivist community. or in many ways, that then it's community care. I rely on community care. I rely on my siblings in this conversation, all 5 of us. So for me, that's like the heart of it, to flip the narrative as we're doing. Flipping the script.
دیبا جان، سوالی بود که شما چه رقم چی خوشی های از در زندگی شما و یا ای که به چی شکل تو خود را دوست داری و به چی شکل تو با وجود که بسیار مشکلات در زندگی کسایی هست مثل Queer and Trans، اما بعضی چیزهایی هست که ما بسیار زیاد برایش افتخار میکنیم یا از لذت میبریم، یعنی به مو نشاط خوشی که تو داری کدام چیزها بر تو لذت میبخشه و خوشی میده؟
جواب شما است که از طرف خودم من خب از وقتی که فهمیدم همین قسم هستم همیشه کوشش میکردم، تلاش میکردم، اما بسیار در یک مثل یک قفس بودم، نه یک جای خودم. مثلا وقتی که پدر و مادرم خانه نبود میرفتن کدام جای، باز من میشتم خانه، باز مثلا چادری سر میکردم، میکاپ میکردم، لبسی به مادرم میزنم، بوتای کن بلندم میپوشیدم، باز یک قسم خودم مثلا خوش میساختم. باز کلانتر شدم دیگه بسیار سخت بود، از وقت که ریش کشیده بودم و اینا. نصفای شب مثلا کلگی که خواب بود، باز میرفتم در بیرونا، چادر مادرم میگرفتم میپوشتم میرفتم در بیرونا. یک چند بارم پلیس مرا گرفته بود و سریرم بسیار لط بیخی دیگه بعدی که بکشن مرا پدرم دیگه تو نه در ایران و دیگه اینم تو خودم بیشتر در پنهان خوش میساختم، نمیتونستم. اما مثلا فامیل میفهمید، در پیش مادرم دیگه کلانتر کشیده بودم میکاپ میکردم، اینا مرا راضی میکرد. و مثلا یک بچه را که میدیدم مثلا خوش میشتم، بازی تو اک تک میکردم، سنوش بازی تو میکردم که خودم خوش بزازم. در اروپا که آمدم باز وضع بهتر شد، دیگه تنها هستم، اما اون چیزی که میخوایم واقعا همون شد دیگه جا.
That's really, Diba was just adding, thank you Diba Jan, that Diba found joy when nobody was around her. When Diba was a kid, the mom and sisters would leave and Diba would put makeup on and wear the chadari and the scarf and put on the heels and feel happy for those moments and joy. And then that was most often when she was by herself, because living with the family, it's oftentimes you don't get that moments of solitude and then finding yourself and loving yourself. And then when Diba started growing beard, and then it was hard to do that. But also Diba mentioned that one time they were wearing a chadar and they were in public and they were arrested by police. Which was also in Iran, and that's like transgression when you're in gender, that also poses many instances of danger, and then of course ends up with sometimes the police arresting people. But also now Diba mentioned that in Germany it's different. I'm living by myself, and now that I'm more becoming public, so there is a joy in that. But there are times that I also growing up, I only found joy in whenever I found myself alone and in safe space. But now that's changing.
و مثلا وقتی که 14 و 15 بودم دیگه اون وقتی دیگه میفهم انسان که چی است چی نیست. باز مثلا در وقتا یک خانوادی بسیار مذهبی داشتیم، هیچ کار کردن نمیتونستم. باز یک 2 خواهر دیگه داشتم، برای اونا مثلا به مادرم به دخترای کاکا اینا همیشه وسایل و کالا و چیزای زنانه رو برشان تحفه میگرفتم. اونا برای خودم بود در اصل، اما خود نمیتونستم که اونا رو خودم استفاده کنم. باز به اونا تحفه میدم، باز میگفتم پیش من اینا رو بپوشین استفاده کنید که چه قسم است. باز اما قسم خیلی خوش میشدم.
Yeah, and so Diba added that when Diba was younger, at 14, 15 years old, so she knew that she couldn't wear the clothes she wanted, the makeup, so she would buy them and gift it to her sisters and cousins and tell them to wear it around her, so then she would see and find joy in them wearing what she actually wanted to wear. I think that's a great place to also maybe wrap this conversation on a very beautiful yet complicated note.
Yeah, thank you so much, Diba John, for sharing that story. This conversation can last forever, right? We can sit here and have this conversation for the rest of today and pick it up tomorrow. Unfortunately, Qais, Wazina, Almas, Diba, you all have busy lives and have to also do other things. So, but we do want people to still engage in the thoughts, still engage in the process. So I'm going to open the floor now for each of you to share a reading recommendation for our listeners, our viewers. What is something that you've read that you strongly recommend to allow this conversation to keep going forward? So I'll start with Almas and then.
I think a text that really speaks to me it's called Queer Phenomenology by Sarah Ahmad. I did my degree in philosophy, and I didn't realize that this was an area that I could study what I have always studied, but without a white hetero lens. So that's a text that really spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Qais, do you have a recommendation before Wazina gets hers in?
A book that I can recommend, there's so many, so now I'm like, which one of them I first, which would also be more accessible to people, that they can actually read and understand from a different perspective. One book that it's called Queer Divas. It's by Martin Mandelson, who writes about, the reason I mentioned that one, Queer Divas, because it brings the diasporic aspect to it, of writing about the Filipino queer people in New York. So it's easy, accessible, but also through interviews, and gives an understanding of what happens in the diaspora for people who are exploring their identities and sexualities.
I would always recommend anything by James Baldwin, because his writing, everything that he writes, it's all very complex, but very, I think, not even accessible. It's just it's relevant all the time,
yes.
Even when it was written 60 years ago. And I also really enjoy, she's a Canadian-based person, Samra Habib.
Yes.
And she wrote her queer Muslim memoir that came out. It's called We Have Always Been Here. And I just enjoy her as somebody I've known, but also, like, we need those books on library shelves and in books in schools. And so just to be, so that they're there. So Samra Habib's book and anything by James Baldwin.
I just want to say, as someone who is cisgendered hetero, my job right now isn't to recommend a book, it's to read all the books that you all suggested. So that's where I'm at.
Does Diba have a recommendation?
کتابی است که تو برای ما وایسا بگویی که ما باید بخوانیم، یاد بگیریم درباره این مسائل، و کتاب خودت دوست داشتی؟ کتاب به فارسی باشه؟
در مورد جامعه رنگین کمانی، یک کتاب از خانم شادی امین، یک چیز از حقوق همجنسگرایان دفاع میکنه. شادی امین یک خانم لزبیان ایرانی است که به جرمنی است. یک کتاب تازه نوشته کرده به نام جنسیت و رنگ ها، فکر میکنم امور ما باید بگیرم خودم بخورم، اما هنوز من نخوندم. من خودم کتاب خواستم مورد اجان
از زبان فارسی است، از
زبان فارسی و انگلیسی.
Yeah, so Shadi Amin's book. Yeah.
باز روان میکنم عکسش برات باز میتونی که آنلاین بگیریم بخونیم.
So Diba was giving a recommendation for a book by Shadi Amin that's on trans and queer people. There's both versions, the English and Farsi version.
اما یک فیلم از رو حتما میگم ببینیم که او مثل یک کتاب است. دنیش گرل دختر دانمارکی او رو حتما ببینیم.
There's a movie that the Danish girl that you all need to watch. So that was a recommendation.
I remember that film.
Yeah, that's on my list, Diba. I will watch it.
Thank you for the recommendation, especially the film recommendation. I think the Farsi text might be helpful for not only people who whose English isn't their primary language, but also our parents' generation.
Mm-hmm.
I guess wrapping up, I just want to say thank you guys so much for sharing the space with us. I feel like I learned a lot, and yeah, it's been a really great experience. And thank you for our listeners for choosing us. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there, but we appreciate you choosing to listen to us. If you are interested in learning more about what we do, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and our website, the Sum of Our Network. I want to give the opportunity for you all to plug your socials and where people can learn more about the work that you do as well. Qais, where can we learn more about your work?
My work is coming in publications soon. So I'm working on a couple of journal articles, and I have some book chapters that they can read. If you just type my name, you'll find a lot of that work, but also you can follow me on Instagram. Just type my name and some of my work is there. Diba,
social media for Diba?
Social media ایتا بگو که مردم باز فالویت کنن.
789 دیبا 789
پسورد نه؟
دیبا فرح. نه پسورد نه دیبا 789 دیبا فرح میای به اینستاگرام می بالا.
Diba Farah on Instagram. I recommend that because it's so educational, entertaining, and radical.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And folks can do comingoutmuslim.com, although I mean I'm not a website person. I don't do anything. I'm just like some like I'm not a millennial. I think I'm like just on the cusp of nothing. I'm like a Luddite. But I'm Wazina on Instagram.
You're at the beginning of millennial.
What did you say?
You are a millennial.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay, another subject, another time. But yeah, Wazina. I made sure I took all those handles on everything on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Already doing a better job than us. And reserving those handles. So thank you so much for being here with us, and you guys have a great day.
Thank you.
Khudafis. Thank you, everyone.
Khudafis, Diba Jan.